We've all seen those stereotypical funny videos about the yelling mom, the kind of rough around the edges Punjabi dad. But when we're growing up around thunderous, loud, booming voices, slamming doors, maybe parental conflict, marital issues for our parents, it's not that funny. So there's a lot of kind of consequences that come out of growing up in a hostile, conflict-ridden environment or simply just having angry parents. Growing up with angry parents can have serious emotional impacts. Usually, kids who have had angry parents will either internalize the anger and then project it themselves because this is what's been modeled to them, so their emotional regulation strategies haven't been developed, or we can end up being really fearful and anxious, and we're always kind of walking on eggshells, and this makes us hyper vigilant. And also, it becomes really hard to trust people. So, not only does it have emotional impacts, but social impacts too. It's so important to kind of take note of this list here of all the different consequences that can come out of coming out of a household where there's always yelling, fighting, and screaming, because sometimes something so normalized to us in our culture or in society in general that we don't realize what a big deal it is and how it can still be affecting us as adults today. So, first things first, examine your own emotional regulation. Do you tend to be a more anxious person, or are you more reactive? Have you learned to fight fire with fire? This might not have been your innate way you came into the world. Maybe you actually would have flourished to have a really gentle disposition and become a really mindful Zen person. But because your environment kind of elicited a different type of personality trait to be fostered and developed, that's what ended up becoming what you think to be set in stone and as your natural state. So, self reflection and examination of, do I tend to move about in the world with fear or with anger? Both of these things, they don't have to be the default status quo for how you interact with the world, yourself, and others. There is a way to kind of use more adaptive coping strategies to reestablish that feeling of safety, release all the fear and the anger and the turmoil that's been absorbed from your youth, from your childhood environment, and then kind of come back to what you innately are like, which might naturally be a completely different way from how you think you are supposed to be or have to be in order to feel safe and survive. Next up, examine any psychological impacts. Now, sometimes it's not as simple as personality traits have been altered, but we can also end up with PTSD, severe anxiety disorders, maybe even attachment wounds. So, in this sense, what's happened is the environment was so influential that it went ahead and planted some seeds to change the wiring in our brain. So, PTSD can show up as maybe becoming so reactive that it's hard to then even have healthy relationships in your workplace. Maybe it's impacting your relationship with your partner, your children, colleagues, authority figures. This is a big telltale sign that maybe safety wasn't there in your youth, psychological safety or physical safety. It's really important to examine these factors and kind of receive external support and resourcing to help attain some tools and strategies how to resource the potential PTSD or anxiety disorder or attachment style wounds. That's an important variable to think about. Another psychological consequence of growing up with angry parents is perhaps depression. So sometimes we don't realize what has caused that chemical imbalance. We think it just is the way it is, and it's just nature and nurture. It's done its thing, and this is how we've ended up. But often, if we want to alleviate depressive symptoms, then sometimes that takes a little rewinding and going back to those root key experiences and using some sort of therapeutic intervention to heal those original feelings that caused the chemical imbalance. So every therapist will have a different style or modality for the types of tools that they'll give you. But ultimately, let's say if there is the psychological disorder of depression going on, then yes, it's important to chat to your doctor about medication, but supplementing that with counseling therapy can be very beneficial as well. Sometimes PTSD can also coincide with anger management issues. So, like I mentioned before, if your personality trait has been dubbed to be a reactive person, to be very temperamental, then sometimes this can scale up and go into the category of having an actual psychological disorder with anger management. There's so much anger management resourcing out there. It's just about finding the right fit. So this is just kind of a side note. If you have delved into the realm of counseling therapy and you're like, yeah, that doesn't work for me, it's most likely that you just haven't found the right fit for the type of approach that's going to work for you. Everybody's so unique and different. What works for one person might not work for another person and vice versa. So just kind of being curious and exploring different modalities is a good idea. Next up, it can cause a lot of nervous system dysregulation, which can manifest as different somatic symptoms in our body. So we might even have physical illness or kind of impacts to our physical health that we don't realize is because the loudness and the fear and the worry of being struck or yelled at caused our nervous system to be so on edge because there was a perceived danger or threat around us that now it's showing up in our body because we haven't dealt with these repressed experiences or emotions. So firstly, you examine your personality traits, then you think about any potential psychological disorders, and then you look at what's going on with your physical health and your nervous system. So somatic therapy that I've chatted about in different videos is really helpful for regulating the nervous system and bringing safety back into the body again. And that should help heal and soothe the mind-body connection so that your repressed and unresolved trauma doesn't feel like it has to show its face to you through physical illness or nervous system dysregulation, because now you're getting to the root of the problem with these different techniques. Lastly, it's important to look at the social ramifications of this. Like I mentioned, sometimes it can impact your ability to be trusting of romantic partners because in youth you've experienced that loved ones can be dangerous and they flip-flop and go hot and cold a lot. So that uncertainty and instability, lack of consistency of being able to expect what you're going to walk into, what type of mood the person's going to be in, or how you're going to be met if you make a mistake or get hurt, not being able to gauge that on a regular basis can really play a toll and influence what type of partner you are going to attract and what type of partner you're going to be. It can also show up in motherhood, or parenthood in general, motherhood or fatherhood. And there's an intergenerational element to growing up with angry parents because now it's that much harder to regulate yourself and model good behavior. Also, anger is very loud, like I've mentioned. It's very stimulating for your nervous system. What are kids? They're loud and they're very stimulating for your nervous system. So sometimes when you become a parent, that's when this stuff resurfaces and you start to realize that there is repressed trauma that hasn't been dealt with. This can show up as postpartum. This can show up as having unhealthy reactions to your own children, so on and so forth. So just analyzing these different realms and aspects to your life, especially the last one, social, is really helpful. Knowledge is power. The more you learn about this stuff, the more you resource it, the less of a hold it can have on your life going forward. What are your thoughts? Did you find this informative and helpful? I'd love to hear your comments. See you next time.